Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Som TV podcast. My name is Jason Wise. This is, guys, we have like just a couple days here until The Whole Animal comes out. This film I directed took years and years. It is a film about culture and food and just some of the most badass chefs I've ever worked with in my life are in this. And I think a profession that is just not, you know, if you've listened to the last couple podcasts, I've been harping on the fact that the butcher and the farmer and all these things are just as important to the food you get and the meat you eat as the chef or the restaurant. And so a lot of people attribute when I've had a great steak or when I've had this thing, you go, what restaurant was it at? But people don't say, where did you get the steak? Where did it come from? Who cut it? And I think one thing that this film's going to do is if it doesn't convince you that that's a question you should ask, it's at least going to give you some respect on those people who do those jobs. Plus, hopefully it's a really fun movie to watch. So that comes out on Som TV. Until June 6th, you can get Som TV for 2 weeks free, a free trial that lets you watch hundreds of hours of original content, including the new film, The Whole Animal. I would get on that because that's going to pass and go away, and I'll get angry emails, and I will say, I'm sorry in advance, but if you don't take advantage of that free trial right now, it's going to disappear. So on today's podcast, I have, I think, third generation, or is it fourth generation butcher, Katie Flannery of Flannery Beef. And if you watch Sparklers, you recognize her as a guest judge on one of the later episodes. No spoilers on how that goes because it was an important moment. And she and her father are probably the de facto main characters of The Whole Animal, this film streaming just about now on Som TV. Before Katie talks, I just want to say this is one of the biggest badasses in food, one of the hardest working people I know. She just had a baby. And so it's amazing we were able to get some of her time with already having to do 80 hours a week working and another 100 million hours a week with her growing family. Katie, how are you?
Good. Sleepy, but here and excited to talk to you.
Good. It's, you're propped up by coffee and those sticks that I see behind you. That's really good.
No, it's an obscene amount of coffee is required lately, but what's new?
This is one of these pods. I mean, obviously you're a main character on my new film, and so it's naturally you're on it, but you're also one of these people in the food business and the wine business, because I don't see a separation, that is like, if you know, you know. I mean, there's like this degree of separation of people who know who you and your father are, and they're like 3-star Michelin chefs and the top of the top. And then you can take a few steps into the consumer world, and I don't think people know butchers by name, you know. But
yeah,
you're kind of a celebrity when it comes to like coast to coast in the United States, and I know that you do a lot of business in Europe as well. Mm-hmm. So what I want to start with really fast is what you and your father do, and this matters to you listeners because if you want to get the best steak, I crap you not here. The best steak I've ever had came from these people. And I'm not, there's no sponsorship. I'm not saying that for any other reason than these are the goddamn best steaks I've ever had in my life. And that's why you're in the film. So Katie, can you describe to me what you, your father, what you guys actually do? Because I don't, you just cut meat, right? You just sit there and cut meat. That's it.
I mean, you could probably boil it down to that. There's a little bit more that goes into it. I mean, usually the first thing that I like to explain is that we're not growing the animals. So we don't have a ranch. We're what's considered in the industry as further processors. So we're bringing meat in from slaughterhouses, and then we're further processing it in our facility here. And so the important point of that, though, is it lets us bring meat in from different purveyors, from, different farmers, and from different breeds of cattle. And that's really the main point for us. A lot of the steaks that we cut are going to be coming from the middle meat, so like the loin, the rib. And what we have found is that the Holstein animal, that breed, is absolutely phenomenal for that. So we really, really hone into, what ranches are producing the best Holstein. We bring in from there. And then we work our magic on the dry aging and the cutting side of things. So there's a couple different parts that go into it. But I think because we are kind of bringing in from different places, it lets us act, I don't know how, what the best word would be, almost like a, what would you call like the owner of an art gallery, right? Like
eccentric.
That too. Okay, well that's dad. That's 100% dad. But I don't want to say
a curator.
That's it. Curator. Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, we're almost like curators of beef, where we're going to be up front and say, we think that this is the best ribeye because of X, Y, and Z. You know, and I was just talking about Holstein. We're absolutely in love with that breed, but we're also really upfront that there are some cuts that aren't as great from the Holstein. And so from those cuts, we'll actually source Angus. And so it's kind of that flexibility to say we're not, you know, pinning our name on one specific trait. We're very, very open to just looking at everything and not bullshitting and say this is the best.
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys, again, there is no bullshit in what I'm saying. You guys do have this uncanny ability. You know, whether it's the wine world or it's the food world, I'm always astounded when people can, or companies or organizations or whatever, can keep a level of quality and they never have to dip down when the supply goes up. It astounds me. I mean, say what you want about like the big champagne houses like Dom Perignon and all these things. I mean, not that people say negative stuff about them, but they do say like, hey, it's everywhere. You can buy it everywhere. The amazing thing about that kind of champagne is it's always great. It always tastes the same. You never have to like, well, this bottle wasn't good. And that's the amazing thing when I look at kind of the steak you guys do. I know the demand is through the roof for what you guys do. You are not one of those brands that's like, how do we sell? How do we move product? Yeah. And so it's a unique thing to talk to you guys about this. I think when people watch like Somm or they see sommeliers do a blind tasting or somebody in a restaurant do that, and it's like, oh, wow, how did they pick out, you know, this grape from this place? Watching your father look at a piece of meat and tell you the grade and the quality without eating it, without tasting it, without smelling it, just by looking at it, just by touching it. It's like, it's a superpower that goes so far beyond the ability to blind taste wine or something. It's an incredibly interesting thing to do. And the other thing is you chose to follow your dad into a profession that, you know, I don't know what the general, you know, what a butcher looks like. I mean, I've filmed with him now for 6-7 years, and I still don't totally understand. There's not a pigeonhole for what that is.
Sure.
But why, before we get into dispelling some bullshit and some myths and also talking about what the perfect steak actually is, why did you do that? Why did you not decide to go into some other profession? Why did you go into?
I had no idea what I wanted to do. So it was more out of necessity, I guess. You know, I mean, realistically, no, I mean, I went to college for art history, but kind of, you know, learned early, you know, what the fuck you're going to do with that? Pardon the French. And
sorry, that might be German. I'm not sure. But.
And so I was floundering, to be totally honest. I had no idea what I wanted to do with life. And so Dad said, why don't you just take a year, come, you know, and help me with the business? And really, I think him inviting me in and saying, you know, take this and run with it. The first project that he gave me was actually our retail website, because at that time we really had a small web presence. And so he just kind of dropped it in my lap and said, see what you can do with it. And, you know, I was able to double it, then triple it, then quadruple it. And, you know, now we're shipping all over the country on nonstop. So it was nice to be given a project and kind of given ownership of it. And then that just turned into a love of what we do, seeing his passion for meat. You know, well, I mean, you've seen it. It's infectious. You know, hearing him talk about it, it's just, it gets you excited about it. And so then I got excited about it. And then the more you deal with it and you realize that what we have is special, then it's hard to walk away from something like that, you know, and when you're consistently realizing, you know, we are producing what some people say is the best beef in the country.
I say that
yeah, it's fun
on this
so
podcast. Like, that's an important voice.
Yeah. So why would I not want to, you know, jump in both feet? And then, you know, it just kind of went from there where, you know, I was kind of wondering, okay, well, why is our product so good? And spending more time figuring out, you know, what makes it like this? What can we do to keep it consistent, to your point? I mean, consistency is key. And so like the last couple years, I've gone down the rabbit hole on the dry aging side of things, not just really accepting, okay, you put the meat in the cooler for 30 days and now it's dry aged, but really
we're going to get to dry aging.
Yeah, I know. And I can talk about that forever.
I want to hold off on that. Well, the reason this is so fascinating is I do think every person, at least if you eat meat, every person has been touched by these terms. You know, you go out for a steak, whether it's something you can afford to have often or something that's a really, you know, a rare situation where you have it for a celebration or some special occasion, you're touched by a steak and you look at a menu and this is my personal belief. People think they understand what a steak says, you know, when it says dry aging or grass fed or bone in or these terms, and they think they know what that means, and they might, but when it comes to wine and you see these terms and they're a place or a grape or a way it's made, people are just so confused and they have all this fear and they go, well, how do I do this? Or who do I ask? Or not everybody, but I think it should kind of flip. I think the wine stuff, it's like, for the most part, look at the price. If you're at a good place and you trust the person recommending it, you're likely going to like the wine. I feel differently about steak. I really do. I feel like it's the easiest thing on the menu to get completely ripped off with. It's astounding. I mean, look at some of these
100%.
Yeah. Some of these steaks, now I know I'm not going to get into like profit margins at restaurants. I know that it's razor thin and all of that, but some of them, you look at them, you're at some, you know, broy steakhouse in like Washington, DC or something. I won't call it any names, but like you're at some place like that and everybody's, you know, pounding Opus One or something at the bar. And you get these steaks and you see them on the menu and they're $240 or $300 or $180.
Well, it's probably going to be those tomahawks. I mean, those are the bane of my existence. I hate the tomahawk steak. But that is like your quintessential restaurant. Everybody wants one of those long bone tomahawks. And it's stupid. It is so stupid.
Okay. All right. So this is great. This is going to transition. Everybody listening, you're in for a treat right now because I might as well have, as you said, an art dealer. I might as well have an art dealer on right now telling you what you should and should not put on your wall right now, but it's in the form of steak.
Yeah, what to put on your plate.
What to put on your plate. So The Whole Animal is coming out, and it's a film that truly honors the steak itself, but it also honors all the rest of the animal. But I do think when there's a celebration, you have, you know, the cut of meat you want, and the cut of meat that will cook the way you want to do it and cut quickly and cook quickly. And I think that for us today, that's going to be steak. So if we need to pause while you go and order some steak and get your wine ready, then listen to the rest of this podcast, and then you're going to watch The Whole Animal. But you're in for a treat. So, Katie, let's talk about a couple of the major, because we could talk about things forever, but let's talk about the major cuts of steak, just to get them so we can get the definition of where they are and what they are.
Well, that's like your holy trinity, the ribeye, the New York, and the filet. Those three are going to be the main.
The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Right. And I mean, in their bone-in and boneless versions, right? So from the rib, you get either the boneless ribeye or the bone-in rib steak. That's like where the long bone tomahawk would come from as well. From the loin, you could get the boneless New York or the bone-in version. We call it a Kansas City strip. And then you've got the filet, which also comes from the loin, left on the bone with the New York. That's what the porterhouse is. So, I mean, that's, like, I guess technically you could like add the porterhouse to that mix of three, but so then call it those 4 steaks there. That's what you'll see on every steakhouse menu, some variation of. So that's like your building blocks, right? But then if you take it to the next dimension, then you have to talk about grade, right? Are they USDA prime, choice, select? And so prime's going to be the top. Right now, I think on average, it's probably 7% of all animals grade out prime. And what makes an animal prime is the amount of marbling, intramuscular fat. So more fat is more flavor, more tender. It's going to be prime. What they do actually to determine if an animal is prime or not, and this might be getting too into the weeds, so if I'm boring you, stop me. They actually make a cut in between the ribs, and then it used to be that a USDA grader would just walk the line at the slaughterhouse and just look at this, window into the rib and make a decision. This is prime, this is choice, just purely based on the amount of marbling that they see in that section there. Now a lot of it is done with computers, actually. They take a photo of it and they've got a software that will analyze the amount of fat to lean and then pass the judgment, prime, choice, select, all the way down the line.
Can you raise an animal to be prime, or is this something where you're just trying to do it and it could end up being choice and it's just
you can do your best, but a lot of it is in the hands of God. I think one of the suppliers that we are purchasing from, they consistently get about 30% prime, which is phenomenal. And keep in mind, though, they're doing everything they can to raise all of their animals as prime. So they're doing everything right, wanting as much prime as possible, and they're only getting 30%. So there's just some of it that's out of your hands. The majority of cattle are actually going to grade out choice. I said 7% about for prime. Choice is like 75%. So most animals in the US will be choice. The other thing on that, though, really quickly, is that you don't have to grade your animals. You really won't see that come into play a lot on like steakhouse menus because they want to be able to put that, verbiage on the menu, USDA prime, USDA choice. But it's not a requirement that animals get graded. You have to, as the producer, make the decision if you want to grade them or not, because you actually have to pay the USDA to grade your animals. So it's like a pay-to-play program.
Interesting. So when it comes to the choice and the prime, this is going to be a question that could be its own pod, so I don't want to go too deep, but
yeah.
Does it actually matter so much? Because if something's like close to the edge of prime but ends up being choice, is it pretty close to prime? And if prime is, just makes it prime, I'm assuming there's prime. The prime must have its own vast categories when it comes to like the top of the mountain and then the mid mountain kind of.
You actually will
right?
see people separating out choice. So they'll say like upper third choice, upper 2/3 choice, that kind of thing. And then there are swings in it that kind of, speaks to where you're getting the product from. Something that Dad and I do is, from the beginning, we're upfront with, all of our customers, just because the USDA says it's prime doesn't mean it's prime. And so what we do is we actually recheck all of the primals, all of the large muscle pieces that come into our facility. We just kind of go visually. And if it doesn't look like it's prime, again, based on the amount of marbling that you can just see with your naked eye, we'll mark it, so we'll kind of tag it and come back to it in a week. Because what we have found actually, and this is interesting, but maybe again, too into the weeds, during the dry aging process, you actually, as the moisture leaves, the lean meat will kind of like shrink back, which will push the fat, the marbling out. And so sometimes we've been surprised where, we'll tag something thinking, this is crap, there's no marbling there. But then a week later, it's a completely different, visual, and it actually does have marbling. Sorry, I'm rambling. But so what we do though is, if a piece really doesn't make it for us, we pull it out of rotation. And we will either, take it home and eat it or grind it. I mean, we've taken, prime ribs that somebody else would sell for $20 a pound and just put them in the grinder because, like this is Dad's favorite saying, like your first loss is your best loss. We would not want to risk sending something out that we know isn't top quality because the damage from that, why risk it? Just get your money back. If you can get your money back, you're ahead of the game.
Interesting. That's a very pragmatic approach. I think people who make films feel the same way. take the best thing you can get, even money. All right. So why do you hate this bone-in tomahawk? Because I mean that's the thing you talk about. Probably I hate to use the term, but like the broiest thing you can possibly order. I mean, not to say I have not had delicious ones and they haven't been great. Why do you dislike the tomahawk cut?
It's all bone. And so you end up paying for the bone. I think at the end of the day, I'm looking for the best value, right? And I want to be able to eat as much good meat as I can. The bone makes for a great Instagram photo, but I guess my priorities are more in, what I'm eating versus what photos I'm taking.
All right, so this is going to bring me into the first term. Okay, so for you, it's just the sheer weight of it. It doesn't make any sense to ship it there. It doesn't make any sense to cook it with it on. Okay, so that's just nuts and bolts. So bone in, this term, if you go to like a Morton Steakhouse or like whatever, you see this bone in New York, bone in ribeye, and it's way more expensive. And it generally they're an exponential jump in cost. So what is this bone in? Is it actually something that matters to the flavor of the steak?
You will probably have some people.
Are we going to piss
yes.
people off with these questions?
I know. Well, no, some people will probably disagree with me on this. I think that when you are talking steaks that are going to be done like on a grill, the bone does nothing for flavor. I don't think you get more flavor from cooking a bone-in steak on the grill than a boneless steak. If you're doing something like braising, where there's like a liquid, something to transfer, flavor, then I do think bones are going to add. But on the grill, no, there's no reason to it. That said, if you're looking at the different cuts, like a bone-in rib, that bone does tend to have more meat on it, and it's good meat. So again, like I'm just obsessed with eating. That steak is worth it. So a bone-in ribeye is worth it because after you finish, the muscle, then you can kind of chew on the bone and it's good. For a New York, the bone does not have the same amount of meat on it. It's a little bit more narrow of a bone. And also it's a bitch to cut, because it's almost like the shape of an L almost, but then there's like a little nugget kind of right at that 90-degree juncture. And so when you're trying to cut it off the bone, it's frustrating. You leave some on there. It's not as fun to chew off the bone. So that's not worth it at all. That said, I think you see a lot of restaurants really tend towards the bone in New York because you're going to have a lower price point for them. And so you can put a higher weight on the menu and have a lower cost for your product, if that makes sense.
Do you guys do any bone in when you sell?
We do. Yeah, we do. We do it all. We've got it's going to be your main too, the bone-in ribeye and the bone-in New York. Actually, that said, okay, there is a bone-in filet, which we do not do because that also is just like the stupidest thing in the entire world. There's no reason to leave the bone on the filet. And interestingly enough, this is really, really inside baseball. The bone-in filet is going to come from the short loin. And so the filet muscle itself, it's almost shaped like a torpedo, right? Like it's really thick and bulbous on one end, and then it tapers all the way down to a vanishing point. And so when you're cutting fillets, you really are only going to get, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 really good, nice, thick ones. And if you're cutting them with the bone on, it's usually even fewer than that, like maybe 3 bone-in fillets per 20-pound short loin. So your yield's really, really off. So what a lot of people actually do is they'll use meat glue and they'll yin-yang the fillets, right? How I was saying they're kind of like, angular torpedo shaped, flip one over the other, right? And so now you have a more uniform width to it, and then glue a bone on it, and now you can produce bone-in fillets, which is kind of gnarly, I think. So, and there's no reason for it. So bone-in fillets.
That is so. I have seen bone-in fillets for sure. You see them at steakhouses all the time. I mean, for real. I've never ordered one. I don't think. I generally am not. Look, I know that there's a lot of backlash to the fillet cut from, major chefs and foodies and stuff, that it's just not as flavorful and it's like kind of the easy way out. And a lot of people trend towards, the ribeye or something like that. I feel the same way. I just think if I'm going to spend that much money on a steak, the fillet is probably not what I'm going to order.
Well, I think that has a good, view on that. And I think he's right to some degree. I mean, the fillet is so popular. You will never, ever get away from, consumers wanting fillets when they go out. And he thinks, for a lot of people that don't go out often, right? Like say you're splurging, it's your anniversary dinner, you go to a fancy steakhouse, you see a couple $70 steaks on the menu. You could take a gamble on the New York or the ribeye. But if the quality's bad, you've just spent $70 on a steak that you walk away from thinking, well, that was pretty tough and I didn't like that. If you get the filet, it's going to be tender. Like there's no such thing as a tough filet. And so it's almost like a safe bet where if you don't know what you're getting into, you haven't been to that restaurant before, you can't speak to the quality of all of their steaks, you're not going to be disappointed with the filet. Like you said, it's going to lack flavor, but from the tenderness side, it'll do the trick.
Yeah. Well, I'm also spoiled. I get to eat your guys' New Yorks are, they're just heavenly. I mean,
better
you guys
than
have found an incredible sweet spot with the dry age situation. They're so Well, I think when people see this movie, you'll understand the artistry that goes into this and kind of how important it is to understand some of that stuff as a diner to enjoy and get a better deal. Frankly, I really do think that by not educating yourself or not being passionate about this kind of stuff, I just think that you're missing out on a better deal and better food, and that's just nuts and bolts. So I want to talk about dry aging and wet aging. So now when I go to a steakhouse and I see on the menu 60-day dry aged, 30-day dry aged, 15-day dry aged. I know the process of dry aging, we get into this in the film, is to sort of re-soften the meat after the process of what happens to meat. So it's not necessarily what does dry aging do, because it re-breaks down the meat, softens it, right? Am I correct in saying this?
A little bit. My mind has changed a little bit over the last year. I think that it does more flavor enhancement than textural enhancement.
Wow.
Okay, this is, again, going more into it than maybe you need, but wet aging, for the longest time, I kind of just parroted Dad's words. Wet aging is bullshit. There's nothing to that.
What is wet aging before we say it might be bullshitting? So dry aging, which you can see a lot of dry aging in the film The Whole Animal. We didn't film wet aging, A, because it's not as cinematic, I guess is the way I would put it. And
of course it's not. No, you leave the muscle, the primal, in a bag, in a cooler. What's cinematic about that? You're not going to get a good shot of, bagged meat in a cooler. That's all wet aging is the primals, the whole muscles of the animals are cryovac, vacuum sealed at the slaughterhouse. And then if you take those cryovac primals and leave them in a cooler, you are wet aging. That's all that's happening. So the popularity, though, behind that is you get to use the word aged without incurring any of the loss that comes from dry aging. Because if I buy a primal from you, it comes to me, it's, let's just say 12 pounds in the bag.
When you say primal, I want people to understand you're talking about a very large, longer piece of meat that is then cut into steaks.
Correct.
So this is a larger piece. I mean, the words you use, it's so interesting to hear you say these words.
So it's
you use them on an everyday basis.
Primals are, that's what everything that we do is all, primal.
I mean, that word is so raw, primal. It's like,
well, it used
like a
to be
Brontosaurus burger from the Flintstones or something.
Yeah. Well, back in Dad's day, when he was working with his dad, they would bring in whole quarters. But you really don't see that anymore in the industry. And a lot of that is just logistics. It's a hell of a lot easier to break the animal down at the slaughterhouse and put the primals into boxes, which you can then stack in a box and ship a lot easier than if you're dealing with a whole quarter or a whole half. I mean, imagine how, much wasted space. So that's, that. So we bring in pretty much primals, sometimes called subprimals. If you, think of like the rib roast that you get for Christmas. If you did a full 7 rib roast, that's a primal.
That's a primal.
That's a primal.
Okay, so and people can picture. I mean, obviously, when you see the movie, you're going to be overloaded with primals in every form you can possibly get. But all right, so when we're talking now about the wet aging, you're putting the primal in a bag with some form of what? Salt and spices, or
no. So you're cryovacing it. You're removing the oxygen.
So you're just putting meat in a bag. That's what wet aging is.
Yes.
It's not even like brining it like a chicken or something. It's not.
No, there's literally nothing to it. You just put it in a bag. And so, I mean, the reason that they're all, vacuum sealed, cryovac, whatever you want to call it, is to help with shelf life, right? When you cryovac, when you remove the oxygen from it, now you can keep it safely in a fridge for 30, 60. I mean, you can go 90 days with slaughterhouse packaging. I mean, the machines that they have, they're $1 million machines. They can, they do a really good job. And so, some people take that and run with it and say, look at this 100-day wet aged product, but cool. It's just been sitting in a bag for 100 days in a cooler. It'd be like if you left a steak in your fridge for 100 days and then, brought it out and said, like, look at this, like, special aged. No, it's just been sitting there. That said, so that's why, and so Dad has always been, very upfront, wet aging is bullshit. It does not do anything. I've, poked around online, tried asking, a couple people in the industry. I do think that you actually get a little bit of tenderization during the wet aging process. Because the whole concept of aging, whether it is wet aging or dry aging, is a controlled decay process, right? After you produce that primal, the longer it goes out, it's going to break down molecularly. So when you wet age it, you've removed the oxygen and you're keeping it, under refrigeration. So you've really minimized the decay, but there is still some going on. The downside to wet aging, though, is that I think the longer in the bag, the meat can pick up a little bit of a irony, serumy flavor, which I don't like. So I think that would be the negative aspect of wet aging. For dry aging, then that's where the flavor comes in, right? So now after you remove the primal from that bag and you leave it in the same cooler, I mean, you don't want to leave it in the same cooler, but conceptually it's the same cooler, with air, 360 degrees all around the primal.
And by cooler, you're meaning like a walk-in space. You're not necessarily meaning like a cooler at your, at your barbecue.
No, don't like put it in a Yeti. No.
Yeah,
you want like
you're talking about
walk-in.
like I walk into a walk-in cooler.
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to take a second to describe for until you see the whole animal, which a lot was filmed in your facilities. They have these beautifully clean, incredibly symmetrical facilities that have what you say primals all laid out, dry aging in the open air in many different rooms. And this process is one of the most fascinating things. And I think something that people are touched by all the time, dry aged meat, dry aged this. So I just wanted to give somebody like a picture of kind of what you're talking about means.
Yeah, no. It's and it's interesting. You say clean, but it's actually, we don't want to clean them very often at all, actually.
Well, not the steaks. I just mean the facility looks very clean. It's very, it feels, am I wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And it just feels very clean.
For the processing rooms, like wherever we're cutting and packaging the meat, hell yeah. You have to clean that every single day religiously. On our dry aging coolers, we mop the floors and that's about it. From a safety standpoint, everything is kept under 44 degrees temperature. That's like your magic number. As long as you keep the meat under 44 degrees, you're not going to have an environment that allows the growth of harmful bacteria. It does allow some bacteria to grow, but it's not pathogenic, so it's not harmful to eat. So technically, you don't need to go in, with bleach and wipe down the aging rooms. And you wouldn't want to, because the bacteria that we have grown in all of our coolers is the reason our dried product tastes so good and also so different from everybody else's.
This is just so fast. One step back for what dry aging is, and then continue, because it is important. I think these are terms that you get the concept, dry and age. I mean, it is exactly what's happening, so it's not hard to understand. But the intricacies and this is where the artistry comes in that you guys do. So basically, 100%. what is dry aging, and then talk to me about continue. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just want to make sure.
No. It's good. It's good because I go down rabbit holes and then I get lost. So really, really quickly then. So we'll take it back. Just in a nutshell, wet aging is leaving a primal in a cryovac bag under temperature controlled for a set period of time. That's all that goes on in wet aging. So you really don't have a lot of factors come into play that would change the end result flavor-wise, right? You haven't introduced anything. It's staying in the bag. It's pretty much static. For dry aging, you simply take the primal out of the bag and leave it in the open air in a cooler for a predetermined period of time. But now you have so many more factors coming into play that will affect the end result on the flavor. The temperature is going to be the main one. You, as the purveyor, can decide what temperature to keep your dry aging coolers. As long as it's under 44.6 degrees, the USDA is happy and you're producing a safe product. A lot of places will go really low on the temperature, 35, 36 degrees. We actually go a little bit higher. We do 38 degrees. But so temperature is one. Humidity is another factor. A higher humidity will give you a little bit more fuzz to product. It's not bad. It increases your trim loss. So from
fuzz to product is a hell of a term. I have a fuzz the product problem myself. It's a serious issue.
I know. It's you don't want it super fuzzy. But that's from more of like the nuts and the bolts. Like, if you're aiming for a certain percentage of trim loss, because that's what
and you mean mold is actually growing
yes.
on the steak, is what you mean. And you'll
100%.
see this in the film. You'll see this in the film. And this is the kind of stuff that actually makes your steak expensive, guys.
I know, it's funny. Well, it comes down to loss. But so you've got your temperature, your humidity, airflow plays a key role. You will probably see some places we don't do it, have like salt blocks that will absolutely kill your refrigeration units by introducing salt. So it's like, why would you do that? But the theory on that would be to draw more moisture out of the air. Some places will use like UV lights. Dad was joking. He wants to get like a disco ball with a black light in one of our aging rooms to say that we have UV lights. But again, the number one thing is temperature. As long as you're following temperature, a lot of those other things are really just going to be your decision as the purveyor of, how you want your facility to run. But so take all of those. And that's why dry aging is never an apples to apples comparison. So if you're going to buy a 30-day dry age steak from me, and then you go out and buy a 30-day dry age steak from somebody else, they're not going to taste the same because we most likely are aging at different temperatures. We probably have completely different bacteria environments in our coolers. And so it's not the same product. And I think a lot of people kind of, are intrigued that a 30-day dry age product is going to be different from who you get it on. There's not, as much knowledge into the variances, I guess, that go into it.
And for me, when I went to go make this film, and it dates back all the way to right after Somm, I became very fascinated with process professions. And the sommelier is one of those, meaning you have to know a lot, but you have to do a process and you got to repeat the motions and you got to be able to. Yours, when I found out that this concept of a butcher, being from the Midwest, I think I saw butchers a little more often than maybe somebody that lives in a big city or something like that. But when I found out that the best butchers are chemists and they're biologists and they are also have to be chefs in their own right, I started realizing that this profession that I thought was one word had fingers and branches that went off of it. And this is partly why the whole animal is such an interesting project to make, is that you guys, the butcher, sort of the center of the wagon wheel, in my opinion. And it goes out from you guys to the chef, to the restaurant, even to the farmer, to these different things. And I think it influences more than people realize. And so when you are talking about, I think the artistry, it's a craft and an art of dry aging meat. Is there a sweet spot? I'm going to ask you for your opinion. We're going to talk right now at the moment opinions, because I know that there will be people who differ from this answer.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Is there a point where this is nonsense to keep going age-wise?
Oh, of course.
Okay, so let's talk. What's the sweet spot where you're like, I got what I needed out of the aging. The flavors started. Let's talk in your facility. I know you can only speak about that. Or overall, if you're willing, it aged to this point. I think it's, here's where the flavor, the taste, the physical things you're trying to do to it. This is where the steak becomes a Flannery steak. What's the aging process? How many days?
For our product, I don't like going over 30, 35 days. I think.
And why is that?
You get a little bit too much funk, for lack of a better word, when you go farther out. And
like nuttiness, like that kind of nuttiness flavor? What do you mean by funk?
More of like nutty blue cheese.
Okay.
And it legitimately will get to the point where if you've never had dry aged product before, you're not familiar with it, you'll, get a whiff or take a bite and think this is bad. This is not what steak is supposed to taste like. There's something off here. It's spoiled, even though it's completely not.
Really.
It's not. It's completely not. No, I mean, I think when I first started dating my husband, I would try to like impress him by bringing home like all these like really nice, like well-aged steaks. And after like a couple dinners, he kind of like took me aside. He's like, hey, look, like I really don't want to hurt your feelings, but like, I think you guys have something wrong, with your coolers. Like your steak is all really bad. I was like, no, it's just dry aged. But he had never had dry aged steak, did not know what he was experiencing. He actually still hates it to this day. But that's
the really far dry aged stuff.
No, he hates any age. He's a wuss. Because mean, I personally, I don't like the super, super far out stuff. I like 13. And honestly, sometimes I'm okay with our 14-day. We do a 14-day that we will sell to like restaurants on the wholesale side of things to fill that niche of people that, you know, maybe haven't had dry aged product. They don't want to jump in both feet to like that really funky, nutty blue cheese flavor, but you just want a little bit of the enhancement of flavor. That's where the 14-day, I think, really comes into play.
Yeah, I think that's a really great sweet spot. That's why I wondered if you were going to say the 14 or the 30. Like, what is your preference? I mean, if you go to a steakhouse and you see a 30-day dry aged steak or even longer, it's more expensive. I mean,
yeah. Well, the longer you age, the more loss there is. And so, I mean, for that, it's just a numbers equation, right? Like earlier when we were talking about the wet aging and I was saying, okay, you know, you sell me a primal that's wet age and it's 12 pounds. So I pay you for 12 pounds of product. Then after, you know, leaving it in the bag for 30 days, I cut it into steaks and I have 12 pounds of steaks to sell, right? If we're dry aging, I take that 12-pound piece out of the bag and I age it for 30 days. I've lost 2 pounds of moisture, right? Just absolutely gone. And so now, even though I paid for 12 pounds, I only have 10 pounds to sell. That's why it's more expensive, because you lose more. And so your end result is, you know, less weight that you can sell compared to what you purchased it for.
I mean, it's, again, nuts and bolts. I mean, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so when we get to finish out the dry aging thing, which I happen to love dry aged steaks, I think that your guys' steaks and the proximity I've had to them has only just made that stronger for me.
Yeah.
But it also has made me a little snobby with the steaks I do like. Luckily, I don't have to sacrifice very often. I think the other thing too is now you send this baby out into the world. You guys have selected it, guided it, aged it, done the whole process, and now it comes to cooking. You know, I think this is the most divisive aspect of cooking. I know people who truly, I mean, major people in the food business and the wine business who they get all their steaks well done. And they're not joking. I mean, I'll call out Dylan Proctor right now, who is in the Somm films, who is sick and tired of steaks being done rare. He's just tired of it. He just thinks that there's a point where the flavor kicks in at the medium well stage versus the rare stage. And I know that there are people who would say that's absolute sacrilege. And so I just want to close this out with your opinion on cooking steaks. How do you like your steak cooked and how should people? Are you allowed to be snobby about this?
I think there's more that goes into it. I don't think it's a one size fits all. The New York, for example, I do like more rare than the ribeye. The New York doesn't have as much, I don't want to say internal fat, but there's a pretty significant fat kernel that runs through the ribeye that does not happen on the New York. The New York, the fat is all along the outside. So I think for that reason, you can go really rare with the New York and still have a really good eating experience. Personally, I really don't like when you see like a House of Prime rib type situation where they put a big slab of rib on your plate that's super, super rare and just the fat hasn't gotten enough heat, I think, to really set up. So I don't like that at all.
I think that's Dylan's big complaint is the way fat interacts if it's not
it's a huge
cooked a little more.
Part of it. Yeah. And so again, it's going to depend on the steak itself. The rib also, the rib muscle is actually comprised of like 3 separate muscles towards the chuck end of the animal, which is the neck of the animal. You have 3 muscles at play. And then as it moves down towards the loin, like down to the rump of the animal, 2 of those muscles disappear and you're left with just like 1 larger muscle. So when you're on the chuck side, it's got this muscle called the spinalis dorsi, which a lot of people refer to as like a rib cap muscle. Some people call it a decal. It's not a decal. Don't call it a decal. That muscle right there.
Everyone out there was doing that listening to the podcast.
Oh, the decal. No, not the decal.
Oh, the decal. Yeah.
No, the decal's off
real
the
hot take.
The spinalis dorsi is hands down the single best piece of meat off the entire animal. And that muscle does phenomenally when cooked into medium. And so just that muscle in particular, I say take it a little bit farther out than you normally would, because that kind of sets up the texture and you've got an explosion of flavor and a really enjoyable texture. If you cook that rare, it's spongy. And I kind of like what we were just saying. I think a lot of it does have to do with the fat. So yeah, it's more, I guess, more than just like a one size fits all. You can't say everything should be rare or everything should be well done. It really depends on the steak.
Well, that's a really good answer and / non-answer, because it really is really tough to, I mean, people can be judgy with that. And I think that you approach that really nicely. I would encourage everyone listening. Katie, where can people get your steaks? And I recommend
online.
you do.
Yeah, no, just visit us online, flannerybeef.com. We've got everything on there. You can also call us, email. We really like geeking out over meat. So, and that's a huge thing, I think, is just having a person that you can ask questions to of, okay, if I like my steaks well done, what's the best cut that I should be buying? I mean, realistically, then a filet, if you're going to do well done, go with something that's so tender that can take a little bit more of that heat. So that's what we kind of, like to help people with, is answer questions. Back
to that art dealer curator thing.
Basically, yeah. Ask us questions. That's what we love doing.
It's great. And everybody, don't forget to tune in to The Whole Animal, which Katie, you better have enjoyed. I think.
Oh my God, it was so good. It was and it's fun. It's so fun seeing it finally come to fruition, because I know how long you guys have been working on it, and so that's just like a. No, I'm so happy for you guys. It was a phenomenal film. Really, really great.
Thank you. We paid you to say that, so it's good.
No,
no, it's good. And that's coming to Som TV, somtv.com, everybody. There is a 2-week trial until June 6th. So hurry up and jump on that. I just am beside myself to show you this film. Grab some Flannery steaks. Katie, what should they drink with this film with your steak?
A Big Red. Yeah.
Okay. What Big Red? Be more specific. These listeners, they're.
No, you guys have to feed me something for that.
You just threw me scientific names of mussels, and you can't tell me which grape they should drink?
Shit, no, man.
Well, at the premiere in Chicago, just the other week, we had your steaks and we poured Ridge Zinfandel, and that I think is a perfect choice. Go to Ridge, grab a Zin, and enjoy this film. If you love these podcasts, give them a great review. We really count on that. And also, let us all know on social media what you thought of The Whole Animal. We've been dying to get some feedback, want to hear from all you listeners, and we're so excited for you to see it. Today's episode was produced by Nadine Netman, mixed by John Adams, and we thank you listeners from the bottom of our heart. Be safe. We'll talk soon.